Welcome back to our discussion, Jumpstarting IT Modernization in Government, sponsored by PEGA, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. My guests today are Doug Averill, the Global Government Business Line Leader at PEGA. Joe Paiva is the Chief Information Officer at the U.S. International Trade Administration, and Eric Mill, a Senior Advisor for Technology Transformation Service at the General Services Administration. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And before the break, we were talking about this kind of dichotomy between should the government code or have coded and then put it out for reuse across government, or, as Joe mentioned, should the government do almost no coding, and since everything commercially is out there for the most part on these platforms. Doug, I'm going to ask you to maybe cut the loaf here, and I mean, what do you see? Because are there gaps in what the government can buy because the functions that it needs just don't exist yet out there in the
Sure.
platform world?
And we talked a little bit before in the prior segment about defining and understanding a programmatic mission. So it starts with that, and then you can assess what exists in the marketplace. And there are some places where there's clearly a commercial off-the-shelf product that will do exactly what you need it to do. And that is really sort of the low-hanging fruit. And what I observe is that governments generally have already embraced a lot of that. And there's a lot of government-wide acquisitions that support those types of things. At the other end is very specific needs to fulfill a mission where there may not be something where it's commercially available off the shelf. So what Joe was speaking about before was sort of this continuum of platform as a service and software as a service. And really what you want to look at is this continuum of what is commercially available, what can I install, which is a lot of what PEGA does with government is, is there things in our platform that you can use as accelerators, or are there some of our applications that you can use to install that are going to do almost all of what you need? So that's sort of the initial gap fit. I mean, even the most COTS things generally are going to require some degree of configuration, whether it be branding or security integration, single sign-on, things like that. The other end is a very specific need for a service that fulfills a mission. But generally what we see is that those can still be fulfilled within the platform. So for someone like us, where we actually develop, build, curate our SaaS applications within the platform, it's sort of the best of both worlds, where you can start with a customer service, an operational application, and then make sure that you can do all the rest of the configuration you need. But I think what we can all agree on in terms of sort of splitting the loaf is, let's not hand code things. Let's configure them in something that is transparent, is visible, is measurable, and ultimately facilitates collaboration between business IT and can be reusable. One of the things that's real key to us, and what I see all over the place, we touched a little bit on in the prior segment, was around modularization. So this idea that applications have gone from individual sort of pieces, I wouldn't say silos because that sort of has negative connotation, but really multiple applications support a mission. And as we're looking at bridging those applications to have sort of a seamless mission fulfillment, what we want to look at is the ability to go back and reuse pieces of this. So to kind of take an agile view of this, you really do need to eat the elephant one bite at a time. Missions are so complex that we kind of need to start modernizing over time. And I think one of the things that I see as a real key to success to governments is when they look at modernization as a journey, not a destination. And one of the key things is making sure that everyone is traveling together on that journey. So that's, again, business and IT together.
Yeah, Eric, so just to make an example out of all of this, there's lots of case management systems, and every government agency does case management in some manner, but they all have their little twist on it, and each agency has particular rules and use cases for case management that might differ. The FBI is going to be different from the ITA, even though you both have a case model of the world, say, for example, for those 30,000 customers, just as the FBI has cases going. So I guess the question then is, if there is a case management commercial platform with this low-code model, low coding, no coding, I should say, no coding, and then but yet you do work within that environment to make sure that it works for your environment. Can any of that be preserved because you're working in a commercial platform on behalf of your agency? Whose code is that?
Yeah, Absolutely, right? So there is this, the tension between, mission IT and enterprise IT is not going away anytime soon, right? There are pressures for enterprise consistency and commoditization, and then mission areas will always want to optimize for the mission they're serving and their specific users. Those are, and both of those areas are also have significant problems in the government today, right? Joe has already been talking about how a lot of agencies there's a clear tendency over time for people to have written a lot of custom software because they just want it to be right for them that could be done with a commodity piece of software, and that costs the government a lot of money. And then in the mission area, right, when folks go after mission IT, there has been a strong tendency to do large monolithic multi-year procurements, right? So focusing on both of those in their different ways are going to save the government a lot of money. Ultimately, I think have less code written, but I think in the example that you gave, if an agency thinks that a particular system that is going to be used for a core enterprise function, it gets it 95% of the way there, but that 5% is really important to them. One thing they can prioritize is that the service that they acquire has APIs so that they can connect it to other systems that can fill that gap for them, potentially other commodity systems, and they could put those things together. Sometimes that can just be done, point and click, and you can wire different feeds together in different ways. Sometimes it might require a little bit of custom code, a script that you want there to just do the glue work between these systems. And that's something that I think, in a way, you can empower more embrace of commoditization if you're able to tackle those rough spots where it abrades the mission and help solve that for them.
Yeah, Joe, maybe an example of that for ITA is you switch to a commercial provider for a certain function, get rid of the legacy code, but you still have data that might be required by the new application because at one time data was generated solely by applications. So you've still got all those 30,000 companies that you're dealing with, or 300,000. You don't want to lose the data associated with those even as the application under which you're using it goes away. So maybe that's an example of somehow you need to bridge your data with that new application.
Yeah, so I would agree with Eric. I mean, in that particular case, you can migrate data, but I agree with Eric in that it's the age of the API. And so one of the major qualifications we have for any cloud service provider that we use is they have to have open and easy to use RESTful APIs to talk to. So all of and we are now at a point where we have multiple cloud service providers, and they all seamlessly integrate with RESTful APIs, and we wouldn't buy them if they didn't, right? So I think Eric is absolutely 100% on target there. And I think he's on target about this mission statement thing. It makes me laugh a little, right? So I've been out of government for a while in commercial space, but back in the early 90s, I was in the military. And when they first introduced the idea of the Joint Strike Fighter, and we had this mission conversation, right? And guys like me were like, no way in hell am I gonna get support from the Air Force. They fly way high, they take forever to get here, blah, 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 blah. Navy, Marines, we fought against Joint Strike Fighter left and right. Nowadays on the battlefield, someone calls for air support, they have no idea who's providing it and they don't care, it just comes, right? It's because the military figured out it was one team, one fight, one team, one mission. I think the civilian federal government needs to move a lot further down the path of one team, one fight, right? If you look at something like the economy, if you're trying to improve the US economy with a bunch of different administrations and a bunch of different departments all operating independently, it will never work, right? It is one team, one fight. And we're doing that now, right? But I just think as a federal civilian government, we can go a lot further down that path of one team, one mission. And as you do that, then the software discussion becomes a little different, right? Because now I'm optimizing the software for the mission, not for the organization. And there is this real nuanced thing. When people say, oh, it has to be optimized for my mission, they're saying the right words, but what they're really saying is, has to be optimized for my organization. And that's not the same thing as optimizing for the mission.
That you got to make that distinction.
Absolutely.
Doug?
Yeah, ultimately, I think that's the best place for us to have the conversation when we work with governments, is to be able to make that planful choice that Eric and Joe were talking about. Technology should be something that supports operations generally, and generally fulfilling those legislative mandates that government has. So when government programs and agencies and ideally departments and beyond are working together on a single plan, it makes those technology discussions infinitely easier. And at that point, you can say, do I want this technology to integrate with this one? Which is the best selection? That's really the recipe for success in government.
All right. I guess that gets us kind of to the question of governance of data, governance of applications, and especially if you develop something to an API offered commercially, can that piece of script be, what's the governance for that? Is that owned by the government? Where should it reside? It could be that it could be used by another agency, even though they have a totally different function, but same mission-related idea. Eric, how does that all sort out?
Sure. I mean, to paraphrase Joe a little bit, right? One team, one dream, and software that gets, even if it's
make some bumper stickers.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think we have a custom emoji for that one in our Slack. So we. In sharing code, right? So if software is written by the government, even if it's a tiny little script, that is owned by the American people generally, and is something that, even if it talks to a commercial API, is not something that needs to be kept secret. Right? And there are a number of little pieces. And we do try to model this, and we work with a lot of other agencies, and this is becoming a less controversial thing every year. Reusing that information, making it available for other agencies to deploy, sharing how that software works, is just sort of basic collaboration and hygiene, right? And I think one thing for folks to keep in mind too is, even if you are, this is just a script I put together. This isn't, we haven't put this through, like the commits are not, are a little, aren't squashed together correctly, or the commit messages are a little slapdash, or like we haven't added enough comments yet. Sometimes those things can hold people up from sharing those things with other agencies. Like really basic human factors stuff will prevent really meaningful sharing and collaboration between agencies. I think that's something that needs to be overcome. As an example, one of the things that we have had a lot of success collaborating with the Department of Homeland Security on is around measuring encryption support as deployed on public agency web services. Right, so both of our agencies have a mission to look at how well HTTPS is deployed across the federal public web surface. And while we're both doing those things, the way in which we have not only deduplicated work, but also really deepened our actual collaboration and support is by using the same software. And we had to do a little bit of custom software for that because there wasn't a good open source library that did exactly what we needed, but it wasn't a major undertaking. And we both started working on that code. We both deploy it in our environments, and so that also benefits agencies, because when we run our scans with that software, our agencies are producing identical results, and we're not confusing agencies with the outputs of those things.
This is software to discover whether HTTPS is in fact being used.
Yeah, being used, being enforced, being strictly deployed. Yeah, and that is software that we have published and we collaborate on. We share rights, like commit rights on the software, and then thankfully, we have also seen folks from outside the government, even some organizations which are traditionally a little skeptical of the government, take on those tools and make use of them, submit bug fixes back to us. And it's the exact sort of thing that I think 5 years ago would have just stayed deep inside the belly of an agency where it was written. But now we're not only collaborating better as agencies, but we're also getting some of the benefit of open source from the public that you're supposed to.
All right, before we go to a break, I just want to ask Joe a follow-up on that one, and that is, do you go shopping on the GitHub under the government domain for that when you need something, like we've discussed, that piece of bridge software or middleware?
No, so absolutely. So two things. One is GitHub and building on a no-code, low-code platform are not exclusive, right, in any way, shape, way, or form. So we actually take the apps, you will, that we develop with low-code, no-code, and we put that on GitHub. and we share it. And GSA has been doing a good job of getting together a cloud best practices group to share those low-code. So even though something is a low-code, no-code app, there's still time, effort, and money that goes into developing it. And those should be shared, and we're starting to do a better job of that. We just need to do more of it. And I think that's very important, and we do it, and we use GitHub, and we look on GitHub, and I think it's a really good thing. And there are other agencies too. VA's up on GitHub. There's a lot of agencies now using GitHub I think very successfully, right?
All right, so we will continue to some of these points. Right now we're going to take a short break. And our discussion is Jumpstarting IT Modernization in Government, sponsored by PEGA, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.